to kind of, be able to overcome the challenges of channel-based stereo, where everything was very two-dimensional, very unidirectional to some extent. If it was like stereo, or in 5.1 you had sense of direction, but even then you didn't have the sense of space. So with object-based audio, the idea is to have all elements of audio completely surround you, and it can not only surround you in a two-dimensional space, but you also have the scope of hearing sounds from above you as well. And the most important thing is the object-based audio kind of frees you from, rather frees the sound designer and the mix engineer to tie sounds to specific speaker locations. I mean, as you all know, there are loudspeakers that reproduce the sound that you're hearing. So in a channel-based reproduction, all of those sound elements actually are tied down to the physical location of where those speakers are placed. And that is why in a channel-based reproduction like 5.1, you have a specific way of placing those speakers in an auditorium in your living room. With Dolby Atmos, you do not have to worry about that. You can imagine the entire space around you and as your canvas, and you can paint on that 3D canvas, which kind of envelops you completely. And that is why, as you can see now, in this so-called scene that has been recreated in a picture, so you don't only hear, that grandeur of the waterfall. You can hear the largeness of the sound. You can hear so many more elements of sound in that space. Maybe some birds, that are singing in some other direction, flying above you, or some insects or some other things that might be making some other sound, further down in the bushes. And all of these things appear much more realistic and much more natural than what would be possible with 5.1 reproduction, for example. So that is what is the whole idea of achieving a more realistic, more immersive experience using audio elements as objects. And when we do this, when we follow this approach, we take each individual sound element, and we are not really bothered about how this sound should be mixed down together. We just decide where in the space should the sound be placed, and it is represented by its geometrical position, which Baylon would again explain in a little more detail. And that this is one important parameter for object-based audio. So each object has its own unique position, and it's not static, it's dynamic. So if something has to move, that position is recorded in real time as the sound travels through the space. So it's a dynamic positional metadata, what we call it. Next slide. And the beauty of using the object-based audio is you can make that sound appear like a point source, or you can make it bigger. And there are various uses of this, which maybe Baylon can explain when he talks about how he uses this format in his sound design and in his mixes. So essentially, the whole idea is to have a format which enables you to recreate the entire audio experience like you hear in real life. So in real life, if you realize, every sound that you hear around you always originates from a singular point source, and that is exactly what the concept of object audio tries to recreate. So every sound element in your sound design would essentially be treated as singular sound elements placed in the space. So you have a more definite sense of the direction of the sound, the depth of the sound, whether it's near or far, and how that sound moves, not just in a two-dimensional plane, but also overhead. So that gives you the completeness and the richness and the bigness of the sound. So there are certain benefits of distributing sound into channels. That's why, one, because we have been used to using that channel-based format for so many years, it helps us work very fast. Certain things like ambience, for example, need to spread across a wider area, just need to fill up the whole space. So they are better suited to be distributed into channels. but then the most of your other elements can benefit by being treated as objects. So in Atmos, we have a hybrid approach where we use best of both channel-based as well as the object-based approach and combine them together to give you the final total experience. So over to Baylon again to explain, how he actually works with Dolby Atmos.
Thanks, Bhaskar. So essentially, when we talk of a bed, what we are actually talking about is the base of the entire mix, whether it's a 5.1, the dialogue, effects, music, songs, all mixed in a 5.1. We call them beds because these beds together, when you join them, it's like making a sandwich, different layers in the sandwich, and you kind of dialogue, effects, music, songs, and so on. And when it's all mixed together, it all comes out as one composite 5.1 or 7.1. And in this case, a 7.1.2. Now, one of the things that might confuse you, because it confused me for a long time, is when we talk of theater Atmos, we call the Atmos mix 7.1.2, but when we go into the OTT, we call it a 7.1.4. Now, what do these 7.1.2 or 7.1.4 actually denote? 7, like I said, is the LCR, LSS. Oh, I'll talk in English. Left, center, right. The left side surround, a left back surround, right side surround, right back surround. So that's 7 channels there. The 0.1 denotes the subwoofer. The 0.2 is basically the overhead. So in a cinema array, it's overhead left, overhead right. But when we go into OTT space, it becomes, we call it 7.1.4 because the 0.4 is left top surround, right top surround, left back surround, right back surround. So you cannot have control over each of the top surrounds that you have, or the overhead channels that you have in that case. Everything that I'm telling you is not something that is specific to me, because I've had to read up and prepare this, because we obviously are people who are using this every day. All of this information at the end of the presentation, I'll give you a link. It's all up there. It's on the Dolby Institute site. They've taken a lot of meticulous care, effort, and resource put in to put this information there. Now, when we talk of a bed, like I said, when we're working with dialogue, because Atmos is not restricted to effects. You could be standing at a waterfall, but the moment at that point in a feature narration could actually be overwhelming, and the overwhelming element could be the music. So it applies to music also, and the way you spread the music out. It could be a scene where man's at the edge of a, like you saw that man in the picture, and the waterfall is a stone deafening, loud, intimidating sound. So how do you create that entire depth of height and depth? That's where utilizing the multi-channel in Atmos makes a lot of interesting sense and exciting sense. From within these beds, like I said, you create what is a complete mix, a composite mix, and you can derive from out of it all of the deliverables, which we'll talk at the end of this entire session about. Apart from the beds and hold questions, or I'd encourage you to ask questions at the end of the session once we're done. Don't feel shy. There's no right or wrong question. That's one thing I always say. I think I've asked Bhaskar some of the stupidest questions just to be able to understand the technology, to be able to use it better. So that means I'm sure no questions will be ever looked at as a bad question. So moving from beds to objects, what's the difference? The object is almost like in this space where I'm sitting, and I can stitch an object right here. Exactly. Or, wherever I want, I can stick it to a specific speaker, or I can give it width. So imagine something, imagine a bird flying by, imagine a car with a music system running and it passes you by. You can actually give precise position to that sound, which we now call an object, in a 360 space. And I think a lot of you would be able to connect or visualize, oralize in this case, what I'm saying, if you remember how gravity sounded, you know, you're able to move in space and you don't even know the person's moving, but the sound's moving. That sound gives you the hypothetical belief that the camera is actually moving. But in this case, the camera wasn't. It's just that sound was moving around you in that particular film. So that's a perfect example of how sound gets objectified. One of the other, and why is immersive sound so exciting? Bhaskar did touch upon the fact that gaming used it a lot, right? We wanted to immerse the player in the game, and that's why a lot of the games that were developed in the 2000s and later and now, they're so superbly done that we all love to play them. Now, the idea to immerse, what's fascinating about it? It's fascinating because you actually want to create the real world, and the real world is built around our ears, and the way I hear things is never going to match the way you hear things. All of you, there's 230 people in here today, minus me, 229, are all going to hear things a little differently from each other. That's because of the way our ears built and the way the psychoacoustics around our head is working. So the aim to immerse is to actually bring people right into the middle of the scene. And I remember that's what Jurassic Park was all about when DTS launched with Jurassic Park. The idea was, I remember, to immerse the audience in that experience. And I think that experience is not limited to just DTS, it's across the board in all multi-channel formats. And to be able to immerse, you're not just creating what's on a flat screen, you know, an XY plane. You're also creating a height to it, you're creating a depth to it. So it's like seeing something really far, hearing something really far, hearing something with a height above you, which gives you perspective. And that's the biggest challenge for me as a designer all the time. I might point out, because I think a lot of people assume when they hear of the films I've done, they say great music. I'm a sound designer. I have nothing to do with music apart from when I mix it. So I deal with the dialogue and the effects most of the time, and the music when we are mixing. So correction, because I did see some personal messages come to me saying great music. No, that's not me, that's the music directors. Okay, jumping ahead. Both the slides had some references, if you noted. If you want, I can copy and paste it into the chat later. Now, metadata. What's happening with metadata is, today, with the way things work, we're able to encode this data into the audio file itself. So while beds are running in a mix and there are 118 objects, I hope I haven't made a mistake, which means you can assign 180 sounds and move them in a mix. There should be a purpose why you're doing that, of course, but the aim is to make the mix sound as good as you want it to sound. Good isn't amplified by moving everything. So obviously there's an aesthetic reason why we do things. The basic bed is a 7.1.2, that's 7 and 1, 8, 9, 10, 128 minus 10, that's 118. So that's 118 objects that you have. So when this encodes in the Dolby Atmos hardware or software renderer, it all gets encoded with the audio file, and this information is called the metadata. When you click a photograph, there's metadata. There's metadata of location, of the detailing in the picture that you've taken, the date and timestamp, and so much more. So when you take this information into a software, you're able to work or manipulate, as I'd call it, the information that's embedded. Now, object audio and the metadata are both maintained separately from the bed. So they're not, it's not mixed, they're all separate. Yeah. So we can always pull them out as and when we require. Ease production workflow for people like me who want to be creative right from when we start to design. So I'm conceptualizing and I'm planning in my head how I want something to sound, rather than work in a stereo workflow or a 5.1 workflow or a 7.1 workflow. I'm working in a Atmos workflow, which is set up for a 7.1.4. So instead of having the expensive Dolby hardware, the RMU as we call it, I can use something very agronomically powerful like the Dolby Atmos production suite. And of course, I don't expect you to go through all the details of the production suite, but this is what it looks like. To the left of your screen, you'll see a little array of LEDs. Some are green, some are orange. So the very first array that you see that's kind of highlighted as little purple, that's how a bed would look. And to the right bottom of the screen, if you see all those little green and yellow objects hanging in midair or to the bottom of the floor, those are objects, things that you can pan and move in different spaces in the room. So the renderer handles, like I said, up to 128 tracks. The first 10 tracks are dedicated to the bed and the 118 in for the objects. Now you can have additional beds. So how do I work? For example, I know when I'm working with Netflix, Amazon, Hotstar, there are specific deliverables that are required. They'd want separate dialogue bed, a music bed, an effects bed. They'd want options. What are options? Things like a radio announcement. Sometimes if it's a lot of breathing in a specific kind of scene, they'd want all the breaths to come down to the option track. If I'm doing a Hindi film and there's some English or Punjabi or Malayalam, any language that's other than the principal, they'd want that on the option track, and so on and so forth. Something that they call discernible crowd, which means I'm in a scene, let's say in a marketplace, and I've done specific crowds or chanting, iski jai, uski jai, and so on and so forth. That goes into option beds. So I might end up with a I will end up with a dialogue bed, an effects bed, a music bed. I usually have two option beds because we do have overlaps. And if I want to deliver something and give the localization team a lot of control over the content, then that's my setup. And the remaining inputs are all for the objects. Now, objects would get divided up into objects for dialogue. Now, I'm not doing a gravity every day, so I'm not going to be panning my dialogue 360. But there might be a time or a place in a film where I want to move dialogue or some object-oriented dialogue content. So I have 5 objects for dialogue, 5 for Foley. If I'm not mistaken, I have 15 for effects that's spread between mono, stereo, and another 15 or 10, if I'm not mistaken, for my music. Yeah. And that leaves me and another 10 for options, just in case I need to. And it seems to work. I haven't tweaked that template in a while, and I'm pretty happy with it. So my workflow might be different from somebody else's workflow. Through the process of doing multiple projects over the last few years, since I've been using the Dolby Atmos renderer, I found this seems to kind of encompass all my needs and requirements. It tweaks from film to film, so you have to be open with that. The last point, yeah, like I said, if I increase the number of beds, obviously the number of objects are reduced. But I've gone through, I know my workflow. I design, I mix, so I know what I need and how I want to move with it. So it's really as simple as setting up your 5.1 mix. It's actually really as simple as setting up your stereo mixes. If we understand the concept of using busing in our mixes and why, if you have a dialogue bus, an effects bus, and a music bus. Now, I might have more than one bus for my effects because I break down my effects into Foley, what I call spot effects like telephone rings or doors and so on. I have a separate bus for my vehicles. I have a separate bus for my ambiances. So my ambiances break up into day and night, traffic, wind, water. And often in the initial years, I'd be asked, why do you need so many? It's because I want creative control. It's not because I want more tracks. I want to be able to, sometimes you're in a scene like that picture that Bhaskar showed you, the waterfall. I want to be able to ride between the intensity of the waterfall to the spray that's coming off that waterfall to maybe crickets or birds or some ambience. It all depends on the scene and the narrative. That picture could be approached from so many different narrative angles, because as a filmmaker, you know that picture would have the lead to and the lead out of. The narrative decides that. So with the way that your workflow is designed, if you see in the picture that we have up on the screen, on the left, you see a DAW, which is a digital audio workstation. Almost the entire industry now is focused on using the Pro Tools. There's no dispute in that, where you have to design your sessions to work on multiple different DAWs. Right on top, you have the bed. In this case, there's just one bed. There could be 5 beds like what I was using, which means I'm going to use up 50 inputs over there, and the remaining are spread over the object audio. Now, along with that, we're also sending off the metadata. We can either use the RMU or the Dolby Atmos production suite, in which case the picture denotes here the Dolby Atmos renderer. So we're sending audio out to the renderer. It comes back to us to another workstation. But I'm not going to look at the re-render coming back. I'm going to focus exactly my workflow as a designer and how I'm conceiving, and ask you to imagine that we are sending out this audio to the production suite, and the output of my production suite goes to my 7.1.4, my speaker system. Now, the fantastic thing about the production suite is it's all real time, and I don't have to input back live re-renders. I can record my Atmos mix. Once I'm done, whole mix is set up, record the Atmos mix, and from there generate a ton of deliverables. So 5.1 print master, 2.0 print master, 5.1 MNE, 2.0. So for whatever are the deliverables, it applies for 5.1 and 2.0. So print masters, MNE, dialogue, effects, music, option stems. I have 2, so option stem 1, option stem 2. That's 14 re-renders going out as an export. I don't think it's about being time saving. Or being lesser headache. Is just luxurious to be able to write that way. And if we look, I'm not looking forward from there, from the output of the Atmos renderer, but yes, we can also output not just the Atmos file, but also what we call the alternate master formats for export, which in this case is the ADM BWF. The other key thing with the production suite, which also applies to the renderer, is while I'm monitoring a 7.1.2 or 7.1.4, I can also monitor a 7.1 if I wanted, or a 5.1 if I wanted, or a stereo if I wanted. So I don't have to keep changing my setups. It's all in the box basically. And in a way, I've talked about the workflow. So a single bed workflow, which means you're using 10 inputs for a mix, and the remaining 118 channels are all being used for the objects. And and then there's the multiple bed workflow, where you have multiple beds. In this case, we're looking at a very basic 3-bed dialogue, effects, music bed, and then dedicated channels for assigned dedicated channels for dialogue objects, effects objects, and music objects. And the derivation of these lead to what we call a stem. So that's a deliverable then, because when you mix the dialogue bed with the dialogue object, it goes out to the dialogue stem. And that dialogue stem, when it mixes with the effect stem and the music stem, is your entire composite final mix. You separate them out from each other and you have separate stems. And you can have as many stems as you wanted. Now, essentially, a workflow all depends on how you've thought about it. My workflow is different from somebody else's. And there's no right and wrong, because in the end, we are all listening to a mix. So hence the presentation here is kept more generic so that you can understand the foundation and from there build. But also because this is kind of more 101, I've left it very, very simple, because it can get very complex very fast. But I tend to think simplify, because eventually Dolby Atmos and setting it up is like I'm sitting in this space. This is my work from home during the lockdown when it got crazy last year, and I was doing mixes from my hall actually. The key thing in this whole process and what I really love about it is that it's forced everyone to work within a technical spec, which was very important because we were severely fighting a loudness war in theaters. And B, it makes everyone understand the necessity for calibration. That's most important because calibration standardization, once you're set with that, everything else is blissful. The best way to understand, and these are films everyone has seen. I think a film that I didn't put on this list, and it was one of the first films to influence me in the Dolby Atmos format, was Oblivion, because that was the first native Dolby Atmos film mix that was done way back with Tom Cruise in it. Very impressive mix by itself, and very early times when we were still learning how to use the format. So I think worked example lists from Tomorrow War, not a great film, I think, but a film is still a film. There's a lot of work that goes into making a film. So before you say, oh, I don't want to watch the film, I think I say watch all the films that you can come upon because you learn a lot of stuff from it. Pay attention because it's not about Atmos alone. It's about how to edit for the format. So you're learning a lot of stuff, even in the edit style, to know how they're using the format. And if you don't have an Atmos room, I think still watch a lot of stuff because it helps you learn just edit styles. So just running through a couple of examples. This is one, and then the next one, I think this was very interesting for me because a film like Breathe, a film like Quiet Place, often it gets said, and I think I've been one of those exponents also that have constantly argued Atmos needs to lend itself to the need, right? The film should need it. But over time, as I have been exploring immersiveness, I've also realized I'm able to capture spaces in silence also, and the format is really helpful. So a Quiet Place kind of made its way right to the top of my list of examples because the whole idea of the film is to be quiet, because if you made a sound you'd be caught. And then you start to kind of dissect through the film to see how they've used the format. Then of course the Right Across the Room, Extreme Trajectory, Blade Runner, again they use a lot of silence, but a film that gives you a lot of scope. And whether it is the action sequences or like the stuff that's typed up there, or I mean, Blade Runner makes me also jump right into Interstellar. So these are films that give you a huge scope to use the format, tremendously use the format. And then my favorite actually, Gravity, because way back 2013, that's way back in my time zone, filmographic time zone, I would see people very nervous to pan dialogue if the movement was required. Now there's tacky movement and there's really smart movement, and to be able to move space as a scene is moving if the scene demanded it. And this film just kicked it way out of the ballpark. I remember watching it in the what's the space in Wadala, the IMAX dome, and I was wowed. It was brilliant. I went back to watch it again only because of the way the world, the movement of space happening around the character, and it was wow, simply wow. It still is simply wow. Of course, I couldn't resist this one because this has been my argument, the challenge to create an immersive space in 5.1, because in 5.1 I still had a left surround and a right surround. And of course, when I watch Bohemian, I'd already done, I mean, music, films like these are special to me because I had come from rock on and I know how we created this entire world of rock music in the film. And again, the range of examples are not stitched only to what I kept telling my friends at Dolby, the film has to have scope. I think you create a scope, whether it's a quiet place, whether it's Gravity, whether it's Blade Runner, or whether it's this film. But I still would say, and at this point, very, very strongly say, it's the choice of sound. And here's what scared me when I looked at Atmos. It made me feel naked because it kind of suddenly opens up everything, right? You're going to hear everything with a lot more fidelity. So I remember the thought being, shit, my sounds really got to be so good now. And it's vulnerable to be in that spot where you're going to be judged if your sound's bad. So from looking at 5.1, I never really liked the 7.1 for whatever personal reasons. I think it was like a marriage that was never meant to be. I like the 5.1. I love the Atmos. And I think the challenge with 5.1 was the ability to immerse my audience right into the middle of where I wanted them to be. And that thought came from Jurassic Park. It was embedded in my head. Before anyone asked me, but there are no Indian films up here. Of course, there are a ton of good Indian films also, but these are my go-tos, not because they are superb Atmos films, but because they're superbly edited films. Great choice of sound, great choice of style of edit, great mixes, they're all great edits. There's a ton of stuff up at this particular website. If you need the link, I'm going to copy it. None of what I am telling you is my own personal patented information. It's stuff that we've learned from sharing. The reading never ends. Of course, then the only thing that's mine is the creativity of the way I use my experience to apply and juice the technology. But there I've pasted it in the chat for people to access. There's a ton of information up there.
All right, thanks, Baylon. That was a wonderful explanation of how you use the format. We also have Sean Weasley. He handles all content production at Disney Plus Hotstar. I would like Sean to talk about a little bit of how Disney Hotstar has found it useful to adopt Atmos into their technology. And especially, there's something interesting that's cooking up with short form content, which might be of more interest to people, all of you, people attending to this session. I believe most of you are content creators and focused on short form content creation, especially. So there's something I'll let Sean talk about it. I'll start quicks to be more specific and in general. Over to you, Sean.
Thanks, Bhaskar. So guys, basically when we launched the platform, it had only stereo audio. Then we gradually moved to 5.1 on the Hotstar platform. And as of today, we have Dolby Atmos integrated with all our content. But yeah, the platform is yet to release the Dolby Atmos, audio to the audience. So basically, Dolby Atmos has basically helped us create content in a different environment. It's helped the audio engineers, the directors to explore the creativity where sound is concerned. So the immersive audio that you hear and you feel while watching the contents, it's mind blowing. You can basically place your sounds from wherever you want. You can place your objects. It gives you that immersive feel. It's like, you go into a jungle and standing in the center and you get the same feel of surround sound, the birds chirping, the waterfall falling. So the experience is as good as realistic. So that has helped us a lot. Plus now you see there are a lot of devices, be it your phones, your tablets, your laptop, desktop, television. A lot of products are being launched with the capability of you listening to Dolby Atmos. So any product you buy, and if your content is playing in Dolby Atmos, and if the product is capable, it has the particular plugin or the technology, you will hear it in your headphones or on the speakers in Dolby Atmos. So basically, it has helped us take audio to a very next level. To tell you the fact, right from when we started off, a decade or two ago with mono, and straight away went to stereo and 5.1. Today we have 7.1.4 audio, which I think again, couple of years down the line, it's going to go to another level, is what we see. And with the OTT platform, there's no limitation on technology. You can just explore as much as you want. So that is Dolby Atmos helped us create content in a different environment. We have also basically, you guys, I'm not sure if you guys have visited the Hotstar platform or the product. So we have also a content section which is called Hotstar Quicks. As of today, we are producing content for Hotstar Quicks only in stereo, but very soon we are doing some POCs and experiments where we plan to introduce Atmos onto that content. So basically the entire 7.1 point surround would be heard in your headphones, your stereo headphones. You could get the immersive audio and you could feel the sound definition on that content. So yeah, that's what it has helped us all to create good content and with immersive audio.
Thank you, Sean. That was a good, I would say, inspiring to know like how, Disney Plus Hotstar has found it useful to, extend a great audio experience to the subscribers. Although, right now its content is only being acquired, and I think very soon
we will launch it.
Atmos will also be launched. Dolby Vision is already launched, and this was so. I would like to share one page from our website, especially because this will be of interest to all you content creators. Let me just try and share my screen. And okay, so you should be able to see this screen. The idea is that anybody wanting to get started with Atmos, creating content in Atmos, to be more precise, for all of you, we have all these tools available on our website. So you can download Dolby Atmos Production Suite and you can get a free 90-day trial license to use it as well. And then you have a couple of other tools like the Atmos Music Panner tool and Atmos binaural settings plugin. So these are all available here. And if you are on a Mac-based system, because unfortunately the production suite only works, is supported only on a Mac OS. So if you're on a Mac system, then you can use the production suite and along with your Pro Tools or other DAW. And here I would like to say that, if you're using some other DAW like Nuendo, for example, the latest version of Nuendo, in fact, from Nuendo 10 onwards, has the Atmos renderer integrated into it. And you can even start creating content in Atmos using other DAWs. So the DAWs that are currently supporting Atmos is obviously your Avid Pro Tools, then your Steinberg Nuendo, then we have Pyramix, and we have DaVinci Resolve Fairlight. So all of these support Atmos content creation, as well as the other softwares if anybody is interested in more into music. So you have Logic X, you have Ableton Live, which also supports Atmos content creation. So all of these tools can be used, to get started with Atmos content creation. And once you start creating content in Atmos, you will realize that, what the difference is in terms of the immersive experience. It's a different thing to just hear about it. I mean, if I'm talking about it, trying to show you a few diagrams and all, probably won't make much sense till you actually hear the difference. And just to add that starting creating content in Atmos may not be as daunting as, having to go into a studio with, all that 7.1.4 monitoring that, is kind of what Baylon mentioned. That's the ideal or recommended setup. So you are able to hear the whole, three-dimensional space as accurately. But if you just want to get started, you can work with the software renderer, that is the production suite, and as little as just a pair of headphones. How that is possible is because the whole Atmos content can be rendered very flexibly to any monitor format, starting from as less as stereo binaural, and it will take the three-dimensional information of the mix and render it to be reproduced accurately on a pair of headphones. And that is one beauty. So some of you who do not have access to a studio maybe can, just for the sake of trying to get to understand the format better, you can download these tools and get started. So that's what I wanted to mention. And now I think I'll hand it back to Gaurav, and we should be able to open up for a Q&A.
Yes, sir. So I have opened up the chat so that everyone can send their questions, and we'll take the questions from the chat box. Also, just wanted to reiterate that Dolby will be picking up a couple of projects and upgrading it free of cost to Atmos and Dolby Vision standard. So you can submit your files in the chat box. We have shared the link there.
Okay, so just to correct you, Justin, that when you're mixing in Atmos, what you're monitoring is what is referred to as 7.1.4. So your mix is still an Atmos mix, which means it has up to 128 tracks of information in the master file. And this is something which people often get confused about. So the 7.1.4 is just one of the formats of monitoring your mix, which is the minimum recommended format. Your mix is still a full Atmos mix, which has at least one bed, which is a 10-channel bed, and up to 118 tracks of objects. So you can render this mix to any format, of channel-based deliverable as you would want to. That can be like 5.1.4, for example. It could be 7.1, it could be 5.1, it could be stereo. So while you're mixing it in Atmos, you have the luxury of switching to a stereo monitor mode if you want to check how your Atmos mix translates to stereo. And there are certain fine controls which you can adjust in the renderer, within the renderer, to make your stereo sound as optimal as you would want it to be. Because obviously when you're mixing something in Atmos, you have so much more information that is spread in this three-dimensional space. You have information that is on the height, zones. You have information that's in the surround zones on the side, on the rear. So all of that, when you fold them down or render them down to stereo, it all has to fold back into just two-dimensional information in front of you. So some of the information that was in the surround space and in the overheads may not necessarily, translate well in the stereo version, because it will probably mask some of your main information in the front channels. So that is the only thing that you need to listen to and be happy about, whether that translation is working well or not. And you have those controls so that you can then reduce the information in the surround and overhead space when it folds down to stereo, so that your impact of the main front channels remains as is. So you have the tools and you can tweak them to satisfy that even the stereo render will sound as good.
So somebody's asking how to integrate Dolby Atmos 5.1 audio in the iOS and Android TV apps that we build. So somebody's building apps and they want to integrate Dolby Atmos 5.1 audio in it. So as a first step, we are trying to test this feature. When Netflix, Amazon Prime can play 5.1, apps like VLC, Kodi, MX Player does not play 5.1 audio. So anybody who want to take this up?
So if you can see my screen, so if you go to that same website that I mentioned and then go to platforms, and you see on the platforms there are all these various services that are supported. So if I can click on these, you will see the device
So we
support.
are not able to see your screen right now.
So if you see, there are, if you go to the website, you'll have various links to, the other supports for apps. And so Dolby Atmos, Dolby Audio, Tools and Media, 1 second. So for example, iOS doesn't seem to be, we'll see a whole lot of, there was a link, 1 second. Yeah, so if you see, there are options that you will find to download and integrate, our APIs into your apps. So Dolby offers, like you can see this, I'll just highlight this part. So you can download all the, you have to just create an account, log in, and then you will have access to all the tools. So you can then add all those features into your apps. So yeah, that's basically what I wanted to explain. So the thing is, just go to our website and search. You can even search with some keywords. You'll find all the necessary information.
Bhaskar Subramanian is asking, can you point out the speakers in 7.1.2 or 7.1.4? What is an object? Is there a physical speaker corresponding to it, or is it just a mix of volumes of different speakers in different XYZ coordinates?
I'll take that, Bhaskar.
Yes,
I think it needs a little bit of a visual representation to explain that properly. So
yeah, so pull that up. But I think look at it from a layman's perspective, Bhaskar. That's the Bhaskar Subramaniam I'm saying, who asked the question. Because the reason I wanted to answer this is because I know where you're coming from. My question similarly when we started off. So when you move an object, so remember the bed is fixed. You can either move something to the left or the center or the right, or you can create a divergence with sound. But the way the object is if you see exactly behind me, sorry, I don't know, my lefts and rights, like something at the back, and you want to fix it to a specific speaker, you can pin it to a specific speaker, or you can give it more width by creating more space for that width for that object. If it makes sense, because I know this is something that you would really want to hear. But an object is a sound that can come out of a specific speaker or two specific speakers or wider divergence from that speaker. But yeah, you can pinpoint exactly where you want it to come, which cannot do in a 7.1 or 5.1 format. When you move something to the left in 5.1, it all goes to all the speakers in the left. Now from all the speakers, you can actually now pin it to a specific speaker. Oh, same with the top. Bhaskar, if you found a picture or something, would be awesome. But this is literally the predicament I also had. And then when we actually heard a demo, I remember in some studio where Dolby was doing the introduction thing, like what we are doing right now, we were able to actually listen here and then go to the console and play with the panner to be able to understand better what was happening. While Bhaskar looks for that, I've got a direct question from someone who's asked, what headphones do you use for conversion of Dolby Atmos to stereo? Well, the conversion is not happening in the headphones. So if we were going through Dolby Atmos mix and you want to hear something on your headphones, you would go to the fold down, listen to the 2.0, which is your stereo. And I usually tell all my clients, my producers, my directors, anyone listening, listen on your TV, listen on your phone, listen on your laptop with whatever you usually listen to, like the headphones that you normally use at the volume that you normally listen to, because we all have our fixed volume settings for like my television or my laptop. I know what's the volume level. So use what you're currently using to judge, unless you're doing a mix where you want higher fidelity. So I have specific headphones for that. My hearing will differ from yours. So use what you are used to hearing with. Yeah.
Okay.
No, actually, I was thinking of, it's difficult to explain it through a picture. So
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, you can fix an object to where you want it in the aural space that you're in. Yeah, to a speaker in the aural space that you're in.
So when you talk about the speaker layout, for example, this is for Bhaskar Subramaniam. So a 712 or a 714 is just the layout configuration of the monitor speakers. Typically, a home theater system, for example, with discrete speakers, would have ideally a 7.1.4 layout, which means you have a. Yeah, this I think I had some pictures, but for the sake of time now, I can't look for it. But what you're saying is like when you're taking an object, the object is completely independent of physical speaker location. So if you look at the three-dimensional space, you know, your speakers would be only in a particular physical, in a specific physical location within that space, but with an object, and that is where the difference is. So when you assign anything to the bed channels, they would all come be reproduced by exactly those physical locations where the speakers are placed. If you want any other sound, if any sound to move or come from any other part of that space, then you are kind of limited, and that is where the whole concept of the object audio comes in. And when you treat it as an object, it can move anywhere, it can be placed or moved anywhere in that space, and it will be reproduced from exactly that geometrical position in that space, irrespective of whether the room is bigger, smaller, more rectangular, more squarish, whatever it is. So the directional and positional element would always remain constant, and that is how it would be reproduced irrespective of the number of speakers or the physical location of the speakers. So I hope that explains it. So just to kind of use your words, it is, so when an object is reproduced, it is reproduced with multiple speakers, and again, it is similar to like channel-based reproduction also in that sense, because when you pan something in a channel-based bed from front to rear, for example, it still is distributing sound between speakers. But here the difference is you have more precise imaging and depth that you can achieve, which was not possible in channel-based distribution. In channel-based distribution, the reproduction is very flattened. So that is how your objects are reproduced.
I think also think of that not as an object, but a sound that you hear in real life, which is why I'd say think of a bird if you're standing somewhere and something that passes you and the sound moves as it passes you. That's what that sound then becomes an object in our film world. That's what it is. But let's move. Bhaskar, there's somebody who's asked what's the minimum area required for installing Dolby Atmos systems?
Yeah.
So is this for we're not sure if this is referring to a studio setup or is it a home theater or what exactly?
Yeah, we're not sure about that.
I'm not sure.
So if it is a studio setup that you're talking about, then yeah. So the minimum that we recommend is about 45 square meters of space and about 150 cubic meter volume. So that's the kind of space that would lend well to have a proper Atmos setup.
Okay. So answer is asking, we human have only 2 ears, so that means we can only listen in stereo. So does having channels like 7.1 or 5.1 really make a difference? Maybe a basic question, but yeah.
No, it's not a basic question. Actually, it's a fantastic question. You have 2 ears, but you're hearing everything in a 3-dimensional way. You just don't, or you haven't realized it. That's the fun part. And hence one of the strongest, biggest, and most painful challenges for a sound designer, and I'm talking specifically about myself, is I'm never be able to actually create the real world in a speaker system space. 7.1.4, 9.1.6, or whatever it is, because the way the ears are working and your head is built and your neural system is engineered, it's one of the most fantastic things. You're not hearing things in stereo. That's completely wrong to imagine you're hearing stuff in stereo. No, you're not. You're hearing stuff in one of the most fantastic formats that God or the universe ever designed it to be heard in. So, which is why you can approximate distance by just sound, right? Just think about it. I'll leave you with that thought.
Great, great. So we have Prithvi Raj Satyap asking, can you explain the difference between DTS and Dolby?
I think Bhaskar so I used to work for DTS many years ago, so I'll take that one. And Bhaskar's always worked with Dolby, and I think we've been friends for over 20 years now. There's practically no difference. It's just a multi-channel format. Dolby still is around, DTS isn't. There should be no argument on which is better than the other. It's just about hearing stuff in 5.1, 7.1. That's about it. I'll keep it as simple as that.
So, as Rajamani Iyer is asking, hi all, I compose and produce heavy metal cinematic music. I use DistroKid for distribution and came across Validity for conversion to Dolby Atmos. Are there any constraints for this conversion?
So, okay, I am not fully aware of this validity stuff, but so I won't be able to really comment on what exactly is being done. What I can say is that if you are creating something originally in Atmos, that would probably be much more impactful than trying to convert from a stereo of 5.1 to Atmos, because then you're already starting off with limited palette, which you cannot really extend that well. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So Abhinav is asking, as Sean sir and Bhaskar sir said, everyone can experience Dolby Atmos in their headphones. My question is that how will the whole surround sound be transferred into those earphones and headphones? As a layman, people don't use high-end headphones or even speaker system.
So it's a good question, Abhinav. While it's not possible to explain the whole principle here, I'll just keep it simple. It's a technology that the Atmos renderer has built in, which takes all the three-dimensional information of the Atmos mix, and then applies something called binauralization, and that process then is able to recreate all of that Atmos three-dimensional experience in just the pair of headphones. And you don't need any specific headphone for that purpose. Any headphone will do, as long as what matters is that the quality of headphones should be good enough to have good sound reproduction. That's it. And what is binauralization is something maybe you can read up a little more to understand better, but it is related to the question that we just explained. Baylon explained that how do we listen to everything with our 2 ears? So that is what is binaural. We have 2 ears and we have 2 eyes. So as you all have probably done this simple test, that if you close one eye and try to then bring 2 fingers, touch each other, you will have a serious problem trying to get them touch exactly, because with one eye you don't see the depth, as you don't get to see the depth. It is only because you have 2 eyes that you are able to see things in 3D, vision. That is, you can actually understand what is nearer to you, what is closer, further away, and things like that. Similarly, because of our 2 ears, we are able to perceive not just the different directions from which sounds appear, we are also able to perceive whether a particular sound is coming from distance or coming from near, whether it's coming directly from front whether it's coming from left or right, whether it's coming from behind us or above us. So all of this is possible just because the way we hear with our 2 ears, and with the way, God has designed our head and ears. And this principle is applied in the whole binauralization algorithm that is used to translate the Atmos mix into headphone experience.
Okay.
There was a 1 second. There was a direct question to me, Bhaskar. I don't know whether this makes sense. What is the difference between Dolby Atmos and Dolby Access applications for Windows?
Okay, so Dolby Access allows you to enable, Atmos on your Windows devices. So Atmos is a format which you use to create your content and or playback stuff, but Access is like something that enables, or allows you to use Dolby Atmos on your PC systems.
Okay. Pallab is asking, what is the difference between object and a bed?
Yeah, actually, there's 2 or 3 questions that ask the same thing. What's the difference between the object and a bed? Valid questions. I think it's like the foundation. Once you understand it, it becomes simple, because as many times as we repeat it, maybe you still might find it a little tricky to understand. I'm thinking of an example to give you. So let's just take dialogue, for example, 7.1.2 bed, if I have 3 beds, like I said, in a multi bed scenario in a Dolby mix, I'll have a dialogue bed, effects bed, and a music bed. All these beds are 10 channels, the 7.1.2. I would put my dialogue on that bed and keep it in the center, because I'm not going to keep moving the dialogue around unless I was doing something like gravity. So you cannot get the difference between where I would use it and where I want. In a film like Gravity, if I need to move it, I'll take it to, and I'm talking specific to the Pro Tools. So the Pro Tools now, the 2020 versions and onwards, allow you to have an object or a bed on the track that you're using. So I could switch from a bed to an object, and now this dialogue can move to specific speakers in the entire room, right? So obviously in a home theater, we just have one speaker, one left, one right, one center, one left surround, left back, and so on and so forth. So a bed is fixed. It will either move to the left or to the right, or there'll be a divergence between left and center, center and right, and so on. So objects are things that you can move around. Like if you pull up that slide again, Soham, the picture with the odd. Oh, 1 sec. Maybe I just do it here.
Yeah, I'll also do that.
Hold on, just in case I have access. And screen share. Okay, so you see my screen, right?
Yes, yes.
So these are objects. They're things that are floating. They could be anywhere in space. Whereas a bed is fixed. If you see the 3 green lights up here, which means something is playing in left, center, right, something is playing in the LFE, and so on. Those are stitched to the speaker itself. That's the simplest way we can put it. The only other way to explain this and make more sense of this is to actually do a physical demonstration of the sound.
Okay. Pradhuvi Raj is asking, as mentioned, the OAMD, is that the sound engineer or music producer?
So the object, okay, now when you say OAMD, you're actually referring to the audio object metadata.
Metadata. Okay.
This is all what's happening within the Dolby renderer itself. The moment I decide, I take decisions on what is a bed and what is a object. And the moment the decisions are taken, It's within the software that it's being dealt with. It's not like somebody's going to write it down and then convert it. Get it?
Okay.
I mean, again, I'm keeping explanations as simple and layman as possible, not getting into complex text.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think these things need a little bit of a demonstration to be able to allow explaining it properly, I think.
The answer honestly would be it's actually dealt with by, for in my case, between me and my mix engineer. We make those decisions of what is in the bed and what is the object. Sometimes we might not put things in, like today I was mixing an entire whatever I was mixing, and nothing was in the objects at all. We just didn't feel the need, or there was just two things in objects. Whereas I've got 118 objects available to me, but there was no need for anything. Even my music, it was just stitched to the beds itself. We didn't have to move things around. We didn't feel the need. There was just one wind track and one point which was moving around the entire room because the intent. You need to decide the intent. So that's a creative thing. It's not a technical thing. It's purely you have to think creative all the time. Yeah.
Okay. Dishant is asking, how is music mastered in Dolby Atmos?
So music mixing again in Atmos is not very different. Just that in music, the styles or the way you approach the mix is kind of slightly different than AV content. But per se, the workflow for Atmos music mixing is pretty similar. And once you are done with the mix, you would deliver ADM BWF or ADM BWave file. So that is what is delivered to the music label, and then they would do the further encoding for the streaming platform. So coming to the mastering part of it, typically the mastering process was something that was that kind of evolved and kind of developed for stereo, music releases, and because of various reasons that you needed to kind of do a final touch up on your songs or multiple songs in an album to kind of get a more consistent output. And the challenge was to make your stereo music sound as great as possible on different kinds of devices, from extremely low-end devices to hi-fi equipment. So a separate process of mastering was done to enable that kind of a experience. In Atmos, the whole playback ecosystem is kind of slightly different, and the device is capable of taking care of the entire dynamics of a mix in a way which a regular stereo playback device would not. And because of this, you do not need to necessarily limit the dynamics of your mix by a mastering process. Or that was one of the primary reasons where the mastering process would kind of take care of. So as of today, there is no separate process of mastering, so to say. And this has been often asked question. Also, being a completely different format, you don't have standard tools which will allow you to do this similar kind of work which has been done for stereo workflows. And different people have had different approaches to kind of get different song tracks of an album, for example, to sound, gel together better. But the whole idea is that in an Atmos mix, you allow the dynamics to breathe as much as possible, and that is where the beauty of the music mix comes through.
Got it. Prashant is asking how much time it takes for exporting all the stems for Dolby Atmos for one film in days approximately? Baylon,
Isn't
So
Bhaskar,
one,
yeah, go for it.
yeah, once your Atmos master has been recorded, so you can actually do offline export for all your deliverables. And depending on how many deliverables you need to export, this is all non-real time. So it would take, anything like 1/5 of the time to maybe a little more, depending on whether you are just exporting one 5:1 deliverable, or do you want a 5:1 and a stereo full mix, or do you want a 5:1 full mix, a stereo full mix, and 5:1 stems of dialogue, music, effects. And so it depends, like, what your deliverables are. But whatever it is all non-real time, and it is much, much faster. And you don't have to do it. It is all done in just one run. You select the number of deliverables you want to export, and you hit the button. Each one of them is exported simultaneously. So you don't have to do multiple separate runs. So hopefully that answers your question.
I think the only thing you need to do is make sure all the files are named as per the platform's nomenclature requirement. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got a few direct messages. If I can just quickly go to them. I know we've exceeded our time, but let's try and do justice to. So why 7.1.2 for theater and 7.1.4 for OTT? In reality, aren't theaters more sophisticated in terms of audio systems? I think I'll answer the second part. Theaters are theaters, and home theater systems, or whatever that we are listening to programming on today, it is what it is. I mean, this is the future. And I think Sean might agree, the COVID leapfrog that process, right? Because with theaters shut down for such a long period, which is far longer than most of us have ever seen in our lifetime, the consumption for someone like me as a sound designer who's so used to watching his mixes in a theater is actually approving a mix, the final viewing copy of my laptop or my phone, because that's the end product listening device. So yes, there's a radical difference between theater viewing and home viewing, even in the most sophisticated home theater setup. But that doesn't mean that theaters are more sophisticated. It's just two different worlds. I think the first part of the question, 7.1.2 for theater and 7.1.4 for OTT, I admitted right at the very beginning, even I was very confused why. I still don't understand why it's different. I think Bhaskar, if you could let that cat out of the bag.
Yeah. 1 second. So I think this is something which people have been perpetually confused about. It's something at a concept level, I think it's been kind of difficult to understand. But yeah, so what was the thing about 7.1?
Why is it 7.1.2 for theater and 7.1.4 for OTT?
No. So yeah, so it's not 7.1.2 for theater and 7.1.4 for OTT. So basically, when we say, so there are two parts to it which you have to understand. One is the tools that you use to create content, or when we say we have beds and objects and a three-dimensional panner to place or move the objects. And we also have a channel-based panner. So these are the tools that are used in the content creation part of it. And then on the other side, when you are on the experiential stage, whether you're in a theater or you're in your home theater or whatever it is. So there, when we say a 7.1.4 or a 5.1.2 or a 9.1.6, for example, that denotes the physical number of speakers and their layout. So it has nothing to do with how the beds have been created, or whether the number of objects is limited to 4 or 6. It's not that. So another, so I'll explain this in a little more detail. But another thing that people often kind of are confused about is like, and this is I've heard many times that I have 4 Atmos speakers. So basically, what they mean is they have 4 overhead speakers. But what people generally think is that Atmos, when they're talking about Atmos, they mean anything that comes overhead is Atmos, and anything that does not come overhead is a regular 5.1 mix or a 7.1 mix. So this is where people generally are completely wrong in their understanding of what the Atmos format is. So the Atmos format, like I mentioned in my slide, is a combination of both bed channels. And I see this question many times. So I think people still, it's a difficult thing for, first time people to grasp the concept of what is beds, because it's a new term. People were familiar with 5.1, 7.1 as surround formats. So I'll just take a couple of minutes. I know, we are quite late, but this I think might be helpful to understand the difference between a bed, an object, and what is 7.1.4 or 7.1.2 or 9.1.6. So when you're creating content, till now, if you were using a format like 5.1, you basically had one tool, which was the channel-based panner tool. So all your individual audio elements in your mix session would go through this panner tool and would get distributed to a combination of various outputs as to where you wanted the sound to get distributed to. So when you had a 5.1 format, the panner outputs were limited to 6 outputs. And similarly for a 7.1 format, it would be a panner which had 8 outputs. Now in Atmos, we extend the same analogy of 5.1 or 7.1 to, so the 5.1, 7.1 was only on the ear level plane or the listening level plane. Now we extend it to the z-axis or the height zone. So we need 2 more channels which will cover the overheads or send signals from above us. And that is where the panner has 2 additional outputs, which is feeding the signal to the overhead speakers. Now the number of overhead speakers does not matter. So you have 2 overhead channels. One is the left overhead and the right overhead. So in Atmos, what we call a bed is basically the channel-based output. That is a 10 channel, and in case of Atmos, it's a 10 channel output, which we call the bed. You can have multiple beds like Baylon explained, but again, at one point of time, they all get combined. So don't get confused with that. But a bed is still a channel-based output where if you pan anything to any particular channel, it will go to that particular dedicated speaker channel only, and it won't be possible to pan it anywhere else in the space. So for example, if you have 2 overhead channels, which is the left overhead and right overhead, and when you pan it to the overhead channels, those are the 0.2 of the 7.1.2. So when we talk of 7.1.2 as a bed, that means is the basic 10 channel output of the Atmos bed. Now, depending on so that is the channel based output in Atmos, which will always be 7.1.2. And then you have objects. Now the object is something which does not go through a physical panner which will distribute the sound and give a fixed output. The object basically is something, just don't get confused by the term object. Object is just nothing but a single audio element or one audio file in your session. So for example, if it can be one bird sound, it can be a car passing, so whatever it is. So that particular sound will now not go through any panel and get distributed, but will go directly to the renderer. So you're not really doing anything to the audio directly, but you use a 3D panel to kind of position this particular audio in this three-dimensional space that you have, and you can place it anywhere. And the three-dimensional panel now takes these positional information and creates what we call the positional metadata, which also goes to the renderer. The audio and the metadata is then combined in the renderer, and the renderer now does the real-time placement of that sound as per the panel position that you had done to output that particular audio in the three-dimensional space as accurately as possible with the combination of speakers that are available. So that is how an object is finally reproduced physically into the speakers. So if you have, for example, 64 speaker channels, like in a cinema, Atmos cinema, the panning of that object can go through multiple speakers, over a span of time. But the same content can be played back in a living room theater, which has much fewer speakers, which will be, say, for example, only 12 speakers. That's why we say 7.1.4. So 7 plus 1 plus 4 is total 12 speakers. So although you have fewer speakers, but the information of the three-dimensional placement of that particular audio remains unchanged. And now the renderer will know that there are only 12 speakers. So it will then steer the audio with the same panning information, that is the positional information using the XYZ coordinates, and it will reproduce that particular audio to that particular geometrical coordinate using the speakers available closest to those coordinates. And that is how the objects get reproduced properly in your listening environment. So whether you have 12 speakers, whether you have 16 speakers, that does not matter. The object is not directly, restrained to a particular speaker channel. It can move around, or it can be reproduced from multiple speakers, but it will always be reproduced at that exact XYZ position, which was originally intended by the content creator or the mix engineer.
Okay.
So I hope this explains, the difference between 712 as the bed channel and what is 712 or 714 in a reproduction environment or in a playback environment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Jonathan is asking, what would be beginner steps into Dolby mixing? How can one learn more about it?
Sorry, what was it? Can you repeat one more time?
What would be a beginner step into Dolby Atmos mixing? How can one learn more about it?
Well, I have a very short answer. Just follow the link I had posted earlier, and there's a wealth of information. You can spend at least 1 month of your time just going through all the information that is there. There are video tutorials which explain every step of how Atmos content is created. You'll have to navigate through the website because there's tons of information. There are white papers, there are knowledge base articles, there are video tutorials. Every information that you want is actually available there. So please bookmark that link, and if you're seriously interested, you should spend a couple of hours every day on that site, and you will learn everything about Atmos, in a very short time. And after that, if you still have queries which probably you could not figure out, you're free to reach out to us. I'll post my email address also in the chat
In the
box,
chat.
and you can reach out to me.
Great. I know we are 30 minutes over 4. Baylon sir, do you want to take one more question? Or?
There was one creative question.
Okay.
Is there a way that collaboration with the director changed during pre or post production with the introduction of Dolby Atmos? I think you have to look at the project from a creative standpoint. You have to know what the scope of the project is, and again refer back to the list of examples I gave. There was a very strong intentional reason why I put something like a quiet place in there, or I would put a breathe in there, because often when I get asked, so what's the kind of genre you like designing, and I say drama, because everything else is a given. Now, the given doesn't mean that it's less challenging or it's easier. Yeah, there is a level of difficulty or toughness in designing action, or like I recently did a horror film, which was extremely challenging. But the extension of that is when you're doing drama, literally, if you look at the film, there's nothing to do because it's very plain and simple. But when you start looking deeper and deeper, you start to find a lot of the scope. And if you remember, this whole discussion and masterclass is about immersive. It is pointless to discuss immersive if we can't immerse people in the world. And that doesn't mean making the world or worldizing with sounds that are noisy, but giving them the real experience. It's like going on a roller coaster ride and getting the real, or going to a theme park which gives you jump scares in a horror zone. So the idea is to find your sound script in the narrative, to be able to extend that to match up to the screenplay that you have. And it's not necessary that the director has to have all the ideas. So this is by itself another 1 hour discussion, because then we start breaking down through how I have grown, because I can only personalize my experiences. I think this is the most exciting part, collaborating with director. I know films where they expected X but ended up getting X plus 100 because sound just changes the way the film is. So it's how much I'm listening or challenging myself to shift, the plates basically, to the boundaries for myself.
Great. So we're 30 minutes out. So I would just request everybody to share your experience with us on social media. You may take Baylon sir at the_sound_wizard on Instagram. You can tag Bhaskar sir at BEEPALY. You can tag Dolby at Dolby India Official. You can tag India Film Project at India Film Project. Also, I've shared the project submission link again in the chat, and I've also shared the Bhaskar sir and Asif sir a direct email ID, which you can reach out to them if you have any questions or queries regarding Dolby. You can also reach out to Baylon sir, as he's very much approachable and will be able to answer all the queries. We have at least 100 more questions right now, but I'm saving the chat and I'll share these questions with the Dolby team, and they'll be answering these questions on their social media, via their social media, or via the email that we have. So yeah,
I think I am tagged on the IFP website flyers.
Yes.
So there are a few direct questions I haven't been able to get to, so please feel free to message. I'll be happy to try my best to answer.
Great. I've also shared the Baylon sir and everybody's social media link in the chat as well, so you can access to that from there. Once again, thank you so much, Baylon sir, Bhaskar sir, Sean sir, for spending your almost 2 hours, and more than 2 hours, that too over a weekend with us, and giving us this and teaching session about Dolby Atmos technology. Thank you so much. Any last words of wisdom for all the young creators out there? Baylon sir.
I think my only words of wisdom would be, it sounds like it's an uphill walk to the Everest, and it is, but you eventually get there, because if you give up halfway, you're going to slide all the way back to the bottom. And if you do just keep walking up, I'm having the most fantastic time of my life using Dolby Atmos right now. For every project, even if it's like a simple short film which is not meant for an OTT platform. My whole pipeline for working is Dolby Atmos, because now my brain is just wired to think in that format, and I don't think I can look back from there. It took a while to get there. Second is, it took a while to actually train myself to be able to mix for these formats. But luckily I started, and 3 years later I got there. So it's not easy for us because we are also relearning technologies. If it's tough for us also. So just keep going ahead. And like Bhaskar said, if you don't find data, it's because you're not looking hard enough. There's tons of tutorials. All the stuff that I put together with Bhaskar for today's presentation is all on that website itself. It's not something that we've built from our own imaginations. And I'll end with saying, watch as much as you can, because it's not only about the format, it's also about your editorial skills. So I wish you all the best. And thank you for having us on the gig today.
Thank you, Sean sir.
No, nothing. Basically, I'll wish all the students all the best for their future. Someone who wants to become a sound designer, someone who wants to become a sound engineer. And basically, do not restrict your creativity. There's a lot of technology around. You can play with a lot of stuff. You can play around a lot with audio, like how Baylon just mentioned. There's no limit. It's like walking up right up to Mount Everest. And you should always look at the video at times without audio and see how does it look. So basically, it would look dead no matter how well you shot it. So basically, it's how you create that scene, how you create that aura, how you create the ambience for the scene, and how you make it, how you look at it, in what dimensions you look at it, and how is the scene created. It's not just the video, it's always the audio plays a very important role. And a lot of people do not give, I know, importance to audio that much, how much they give it to video. Because audio is only heard, whereas video is seen. So that's a very big misconception a lot of people do have. So it's just that be more creative, I would say, on audio as well. Give more importance to audio and just don't find any limitations where your creativity is concerned.
Thank you.
Sorry, I know it was last words, but I'm still alive, so I'm going to have one more last word. Because Sean just said something very important. He said most people don't give importance to audio. But here's the thing, I don't have a Lamborghini coming to pick me up every day. So
Right.
I face the same battle. I give importance to sound, and it's me who gives it, and I have to face the same hurdles you're facing. I don't have any special exemptions. Actually, the problem is, if I am the specialist 100-meter runner, I get 6 seconds to complete the race, lesser than everybody else, because I have got 20 years of experience. So I get lesser accommodation because I know how to put the fires out. But I love sound so much that I say I'm not going to let it go. Even if I have less time, I'm going to make sure it sounds good. So have the love and passion for what you're doing. That's, I think, what I wanted to add to what Sean said. Thank you.
Bhaskar sir, any last words of wisdom?
Yeah, it's not really any pearls of wisdom. All I would like to say that we at Dolby have always strived to create the best technology for content creators to use and for the users to experience audio and visuals in the best possible format. The motto of our company remains to create spectacular experiences. And so the Atmos tools are something that was created not just within Dolby, but in collaboration with all the creative sound designers, mix engineers across the globe, and keeping in mind existing workflows and what works best. We have a lot of feedback from the creative community that has been utilized in creating all these tools, and they are in constant development. So the point of all this is that if you get started with the Atmos mixing process, and you will find that it while all the talk that we did today may seem so complicated and all the concepts might seem so daunting, the moment you start with it hands-on, you'll realize it's as simple as working with stereo 5.1, because that is how the whole tools and all the entire workflow was conceived and designed and built. And only when you hear it, the end result, so will that be like a revelation to you in that sense. So yeah, we have created all the tools to allow you to paint a larger canvas, so all the palette is there. It's up to you to start utilizing it, painting all those, wonderful, masterpieces with sound. And like I said, the tools are all available. You have a 90-day free trial, so feel free to make most use of it. And I'm sure at the end of it, you'll all, feel great that, feel good about that you have probably, been able to express your creativity in a much better way with less limitations of a format kind of not allowing you to do certain things. So that's the only thing. And only thing is, don't just keep thinking that one day I'll use Atmos. Maybe you should just get started. Use that 90-day free trial to your fullest, and you would be quite happy to, I'm sure, work with all the latest technology available. Yeah. All the best to all you content creators, and hoping to see some great content coming in, for which we will be then, have a selection procedure to kind of choose some of the best content to kind of redone in Atmos.
Yes, and I'm sharing the link again in the chat box. So thank you everyone. Thank you everyone for attending. I'm also sharing the links here. And I'm sorry we weren't able to answer all the questions, but all of these speakers are very much approachable, and I've shared the social media links in the chat. I've also shared the email IDs of Dolby officials and Bhaskar, and you guys can reach out to them and they'll be able to answer your queries. So thank you again. Thank you so much. Signing off.
Most welcome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody, for your time, and thank you, everybody. Thanks, Baylon. Thanks, Sean. Thanks.
Thank you, Bhaskar.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Have a good weekend. Bye.